All right, so today we're diving headfirst into a real political whirlwind, Donald Trump's second term.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you're prepping for a big meeting, just catching up on the news, or you're a total politics junkie, this deep dive's for you.
Absolutely.
It's January 2025, and against all odds, Trump pulled it off again, another 4 years.
It's true.
Now everyone is trying to figure out, like, what does this mean for America
Right.
and really the world?
Yeah.
We've got a whole stack of sources here covering everything, immigration, the economy, to healthcare, education. Like, it's all on the table.
It really is. You're right. The second term is already proving to be anything but predictable.
Oh, yeah.
And to really get what's going on,
Yeah.
we need to look, beyond those headlines.
Yeah.
There are layers of complexity here, intended consequences, and, those unintended ripple effects.
Oh, those always pop up, don't they?
They always do.
Okay, so no sugarcoating here. We're going deep. But
Yeah.
just to be clear, this isn't about us taking sides.
No, not at all.
We're here to equip you with the facts and different viewpoints so you can form your own, informed opinion.
Exactly. Think of us as your guides through this political jungle.
I like that. Okay, let's jump right in. First up, immigration. Trump's administration has hit the ground running, ramping up those deportation efforts and, reintroducing that controversial Muslim ban.
Right.
We're seeing protests and legal challenges already.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Trump signed an executive order aiming to end birthright citizenship.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
This move on birthright citizenship's a really big deal. I mean,
Yeah.
it directly impacts families, and it really challenges a core principle of American identity.
Right.
We're talking the 14th Amendment,
Wow.
ratified in 1868, which granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States.
Huh.
And this was specifically designed to ensure the rights of formerly enslaved people after the Civil War.
So taking a step back, this isn't just about policy. It's about, reshaping the very fabric of what it means to be American.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, supporters of this executive order, they argue it strengthens national security and upholds immigration laws. They say it'll deter illegal immigration and ease the strain on public resources. But critics are pushing back hard. They're raising concerns about human rights violations. They argue this move disrupts families, creates fear, uncertainty, and damages America's, image on the global stage.
It's a stark contrast, these two sides, almost like we're talking about two different Americas.
And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bridging this divide, understanding both sides without getting lost in the rhetoric.
Okay, so immigration is definitely a powder keg right now.
It is.
Let's move on to the economy. Remember those America First campaign promises?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Trump seems to be doubling down, slapping a 25% tariff on imports from both Canada and Mexico.
Wow.
This seems like a risky move. Are we heading towards a trade war?
Well, it's definitely a bold move, and yes, there are risks involved.
Yeah.
Imagine your favorite Canadian maple syrup now costing 25% more. This is the reality for consumers. If these tariffs trigger, retaliatory measures from Canada and Mexico, American exporters could also be hit hard, which could lead to job losses here.
So not exactly the win-win the administration might be hoping for.
Exactly. Now, the administration argues that these tariffs will protect American industries and bring back those manufacturing jobs.
Okay.
It's about boosting domestic production and reducing our reliance on foreign goods.
So Made in America is back in style.
It seems so, but the big question is, will these tariffs actually achieve, their intended goals without causing more harm than good? That remains to be seen.
Okay, so tariffs are a gamble, to say the least.
For sure.
But it's not just tariffs, right? What about those corporate tax cuts and deregulation efforts that were such a big part of Trump's first term? Are those continuing?
Yeah, those trends are continuing, and it's creating quite a stir. The argument for corporate tax cuts is that it'll attract, foreign investment and stimulate economic growth. And deregulation, in theory, is supposed to reduce red tape and allow businesses to flourish.
So less government interference, more free market magic.
That's the idea. But there's another side to this coin. Critics are worried about the long-term consequences. Looser environmental regulations could lead to more pollution and environmental damage.
Yeah.
And unchecked financial deregulation could increase the risk of another, economic crisis.
So it's a high-wire act, potential for growth, but a real risk of a nasty fall.
Yeah.
All right, we've covered immigration and the economy, two huge areas impacted by Trump's second term. But let's not forget about healthcare, which is always a hot-button issue. I was surprised to see that the Affordable Care Act is back on the chopping block.
Yeah, healthcare is once again front and center. The Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, has been a constant target of Republican lawmakers, and it seems Trump is determined to dismantle it.
And to add fuel to the fire, he's appointed Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a known vaccine skeptic, as the new Secretary of Health.
Wow.
This has to be one of the most controversial appointments so far.
It certainly is. Kennedy Jr.'s stance on vaccines has drawn sharp criticism from the medical community. They're concerned about the impact his views could have on public health policy, particularly vaccination rates. This, coupled with the potential repeal of the Affordable Care Act, has many people worried about the future of healthcare in America.
It seems like Trump's second term is shaping up to be just as tumultuous as his first, if not more so.
That's a fair assessment, and we're just getting started. We still have a lot to unpack, including energy policy justice and security foreign policy, and even education.
All right, well, we've got our work cut out for us, but for now, let's take a quick break and come back to delve deeper into these other fascinating and sometimes unsettling aspects of Trump's second term.
Sounds good.
All right, we're back and ready to dive into more of these major shifts happening in Trump's second term.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's talk energy. I'm seeing those drill baby drill slogans popping up again.
Oh, yeah.
Is that like a sign of where things are headed?
It seems that way. The administration has been busy, lifting restrictions on oil and gas drilling, even in some protected areas.
Really?
And they've also slashed subsidies for renewable energy.
So is this a complete reversal of the progress we've made towards, cleaner energy? Are we hitting the rewind button on climate action?
It definitely feels like a step back for environmentalists.
Yeah.
They're warning about, irreversible damage to ecosystems and a setback in the fight against climate change. Their argument is we should be investing in renewable energy, not propping up the fossil fuel industry.
Okay, but the administration has its own rationale, right? What are they saying about this, shift in energy policy?
Their argument is centered on energy independence and job creation. They're saying that by boosting domestic oil and gas production, we can reduce our reliance on foreign oil and create jobs in the process.
So it's about national security and economic growth, but are those short-term gains worth the potential long-term, environmental costs? It seems like a risky trade-off.
That's the debate, isn't it? Weighing the immediate benefits against the potential long-term consequences. And it's not just an environmental debate.
Right.
There's also the economic argument that slashing investments in renewable energy will hurt America's competitiveness in a global market that's increasingly moving towards cleaner energy sources.
It's like we're betting on the past while the rest of the world is racing towards the future.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Okay, let's shift gears to another area that's seen some, pretty dramatic developments: justice and security. The pardoning of over 1,500 people linked to the January 6th Capitol riots has been incredibly divisive.
Yeah, it's a move that sparked outrage and accusations that, Trump is undermining the rule of law. Critics argue that this sets a dangerous precedent and sends a message that, political violence is acceptable.
And it's not just the pardons. There's also been a noticeable purge of federal employees who have, publicly disagreed with Trump's agenda.
Yeah.
This feels like something out of a political thriller. Are we witnessing an erosion of democratic norms?
That's a concern that many people are voicing. The fear is that this purge will create a climate of fear within the government,
Right.
discouraging dissent and leading to, a less effective and accountable bureaucracy.
It's almost like he's consolidating power by surrounding himself with loyalists and silencing any opposition.
That's certainly one interpretation of these events. On the other hand, supporters of the pardons argue that it's about moving on from the past and healing those divisions in the country. They see it as a gesture of reconciliation.
But reconciliation on whose terms? It seems like those who are most affected by the events of January 6th are the ones being asked to just forgive and forget.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers.
Right.
And it raises some, fundamental questions about justice, accountability, and the fragility of democratic institutions.
Okay, so things are pretty tumultuous on the home front, but
Yeah.
how's Trump handling things on the world stage? I've seen headlines about his promise to swiftly end the Russia-Ukraine war threats of tariffs against the European Union and ongoing tensions with China. Is this America first on a global scale?
It appears that Trump is sticking to his, unilateral approach, prioritizing American interests above all else.
Okay.
While his supporters applaud his decisiveness and willingness to stand up to other countries, critics worry that his actions are isolating America and damaging relationships with key allies.
So it's a go-it-alone strategy, even if it means, alienating our friends.
That seems to be the approach. Take the situation in Ukraine, for example. While a swift end to the war would be a positive outcome, Many experts are skeptical of Trump's ability to achieve this through, unilateral negotiations.
Right.
They argue that it requires a coordinated effort with international partners to put pressure on Russia and find a lasting solution.
And those tariff threats against the EU, are we really heading for a trade war with our allies?
It's a real possibility, and one that many economists are warning against.
Wow.
They argue that such a trade war would harm both sides, leading to higher prices for consumers and job losses.
Hmm.
The administration's argument is that these tariffs are necessary to protect American industries from unfair competition.
But isn't there a risk that these protectionist measures will backfire, leading to retaliatory tariffs from the EU and ultimately hurting the American economy?
That's the concern. It's a delicate balancing act, and one that requires careful consideration of the potential consequences.
And what about China? That relationship seems as tense as ever.
Yes, tensions with China continue to simmer over trade, technology, and human rights. The administration accuses China of unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft, while China sees American actions as an attempt to contain its rise as a global power.
It's like a geopolitical chess match, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
This relationship will continue to be one of the most defining challenges of the 21st century.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Immigration, the economy, energy justice, and security foreign policy. It's clear that Trump's second term is shaping up to be a truly consequential period in American history.
Absolutely.
But there's one more area I want to touch on before we wrap up: education.
Yes, this is where things get really interesting.
Oh.
Trump has proposed a radical overhaul of the education system, including eliminating the Department of Education and pushing for what he calls, patriotic education.
Eliminating the Department of Education, that seems like a pretty drastic move. What's the reasoning behind that?
The administration argues that this would reduce bureaucracy, save taxpayer money, and give more control to states and local communities.
Mm-hmm.
They claim that the current system is too centralized and that the federal government has too much influence over education.
But doesn't the Department of Education play a crucial role in ensuring that all students have access to quality education, regardless of their background or where they live? What happens to those programs and funding if it's abolished?
That's a key question that critics are raising. They're concerned that eliminating the Department of Education would exacerbate existing inequalities in education, leaving disadvantaged students behind.
And what about this push for patriotic education? What does that actually entail?
It's a bit vague, but it seems to involve a focus on American exceptionalism, traditional values, and a sanitized version of history.
Hmm.
There's also a move to limit the teaching of critical race theory, which the administration views as divisive and unpatriotic.
So it's about shaping a particular narrative about America and its past one that emphasizes unity and national pride, but potentially at the expense of critical thinking and honest dialogue about, difficult issues.
That's one way to interpret it. Critics argue that this approach to education is an attempt to whitewash history and silence dissenting voices.
Wow.
They fear that it will create a generation of students who are ill-equipped to deal with the complexities of the real world.
It's a fascinating and, frankly, concerning development. This idea of using education as a tool for shaping a particular ideology has a long and often troubling history.
You're absolutely right. And it raises profound questions about the purpose of education, the role of government, and the very nature of democracy.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here today. From immigration and the economy to energy and education, Trump's second term is proving to be just as unpredictable and controversial as his first.
It really is.
But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more aspect of his agenda that has people talking: his focus on online academies.
Right. This push for online education is a key part of his vision for what he calls a patriotic education system. The idea is to offer an alternative to traditional public schools, particularly those that he views as promoting a liberal agenda or teaching critical race theory.
So it's like a virtual schoolhouse with a conservative slant.
In a way, yes. Supporters of online academies argue that they offer parents more control over their children's education, provide a more personalized learning experience, and can be more cost-effective than traditional brick-and-mortar schools.
But what about the potential downsides? I mean, not everyone has access to reliable internet or the necessary technology for online learning. And what about the social aspect of education? Don't kids need interaction with their peers?
Those are valid concerns. Critics worry that online academies could exacerbate existing educational inequalities, particularly for students from low-income families or those living in rural areas with limited internet access. They also point out that online learning can be isolating and may not be suitable for all students. particularly those who thrive in a more traditional classroom setting.
It's interesting to see how technology is reshaping education, but it definitely raises some important questions about access quality and the overall impact on students.
Absolutely. And it will be fascinating to see how this push for online academies plays out in the coming years.
We've covered so much in this deep dive: immigration, the economy, energy justice and security, foreign policy, even education.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
It's clear that Trump's second term is, shaping up to be just as eventful as his first, maybe even more so.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And while each of these issues is, complex in its own right, they're also like interconnected.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What happens in one area inevitably has ripple effects,
Mhm.
in others. It's like this giant puzzle
Right.
where each piece influences that overall picture.
That's a great way to put it. And it makes you realize how difficult it is to predict what's going to happen next. But that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, right? Trying to make sense of these interconnected events and figure out what it all means for the future.
Absolutely. And to do that, we need to think critically,
Yeah.
consider different perspectives and be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Okay, so no easy answers, just a lot of questions and a whole lot of uncertainty. But that's kind of the reality of politics, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it's constantly evolving.
you got that right.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and make your voice heard.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into the uncharted waters of Trump's second term.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope we've given you some food for thought and maybe even sparked some, lively conversations.
It's been great exploring these complex issues with you.
Mm.
And as we move forward into this new era of American politics, just remember to stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.
Until next time, keep diving deep.